Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Berkeley. I'm a trustee of the Westport Library, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to a very special evening with one of America's most beloved and acclaimed authors. Our guest tonight is Richard Russo, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author whose work has left an indelible mark on American literature. He is the author of 10 novels, including Empire Falls, which earned him the Pulitzer in 2002, and that he then adapted to a screenplay for an award-winning miniseries. He also wrote Nobody's Fool, which became a celebrated film starring Westport's own Paul Newman. His more recent novels, Somebody's Fool, Chances Are, and Everybody's Fool, continue his tradition of insightful, richly human storytelling, blending humor, heartbreak, and sharp social observation. In addition to his fiction, Russo is a masterful essayist. His new book, Life and Art, which I just finished and thoroughly enjoyed, is a powerful collection of 13 essays that explore the intersection of storytelling and lived experience. Just a few moments ago, I had the opportunity to have a quick conversation with Richard, and he described this book as a pandemic document because the majority of the essays were penned while he, along with so many, were sheltering at home. With his trademark honesty and depth, he reflects on family, memory, writing, and the ways we use narrative as a lens to understand the world around us. Stories, by their very nature, he writes, are incubators for meaning. We tell them to entertain, but also to make sense of things, or try to. Guiding tonight's conversation is Suzanne Leopold, a passionate supporter of authors and the literary community. Suzanne is the creator of SuzieApproved.com and the founder of Susie Approved Book Tours, where she works with a wide network of bloggers and readers to promote new books. A Westport resident for over 20 years, Suzanne served as a juror for the 2024 Westport Prize for Literature and is a familiar face to many in our local literary circles. Please join me in welcoming Richard Russo and Suzanne Leopold.
Hello, everyone.
I'm honored to be interviewing you. This book, these stories are very insightful. So before I delve into the questions about your book, if you can give the audience a summary about the essays and the structure of the two parts of the book, Life and Art.
At some point, and before I do that, though, first of all, thank you, Susie, for doing this tonight, for being my conversation partner. I do that a lot at my daughter's bookstore in Portland, Maine. And hers tonight is the much more difficult job than mine sitting here. At some point, I don't remember exactly when, most of these essays were written during the pandemic. Not all of them. The Lives of Others, I remember, was published several years before the pandemic, and there were a couple of other essays in it too that were pre-pandemic, but most of them were written during the pandemic. And at some point, I was just kind of looking through them. I just thought they would just be a book of essays. But at some point, it just occurred to me that, without really thinking about it, some kind of fit into the kind of personal experience, things that happened directly to me, or people that I knew, and other things were standing back a little bit farther, and were were not so much about lived experience as they were about art. And so I found myself writing about Townes Van Zandt and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And so they just, at some point, I just realized that was the natural dichotomy for the book. Just fell into place.
What was the process behind it? Like during the pandemic, did you every day work on it, or did it just?
Well, I was, if memory serves, I was working on a novel at that time too. Probably would have been Somebody's Fool, I think, if my chronology is right. So I would have been working on a novel. I'm never not working on a novel. So I'm sure that I must have been working on probably Somebody's Fool then. But we were all told to go home and stay there, and I had to laugh about this with somebody at an event like this not long ago, where my conversation partner reminded me that in one of my essays I made reference to the fact that when the pandemic hit and we were all told to go home and stay there, how absolutely delighted I was because all of the engagements that I had agreed to do before that, like 2 months of them, or 3 months of them all planned out, all the things that I had said yes to suddenly evaporated, and how happy that made me. So, it did, but that went away fast enough, and after it, here I am again. I lost the thread of that whole thing, that whole thing completely. But what happened was that even though I was working on a novel, the extra time that came as a result of not having to go out and travel and do things like that, I just had extra time on my hands, and the essays just seemed to fit in. But then the other question, of course, Susie, is not just it's just why not short stories, or why not screenplays, or why not any other form of why in particular essays? And I'm not sure I know the answer to that, because often when I'm working on a novel, I will almost always screw up at some point and make a terrible mistake, and then sit there staring at it, trying to think, what did I do wrong here? I've done something wrong, and I can't figure out what it is. And when that happens, I've learned over the decades that I've been doing this, that you can either stand there staring stupidly at it, or you can set it aside and do something else. Write a short story, write an essay, write an hour TV show. And when you do that, you'll find, or I often find anyway, that if I take a month or 6 weeks off, then I can come back and I'll suddenly know what was confusing me or messing me up. But in this case, I didn't write. When I was finished working with my novel, I didn't write screenplays. I didn't write short stories. I didn't do anything in another form except these essays.
Wow. So you didn't worry about a word count every day, you weren't. So I'm going to start off with the section Life. The essay was Stiff Neck, which this essay just threw me into the book. I couldn't stop reading this book. This essay packs a punch with relatable themes: vaccination hesitancy, tribe mentality, relationships with family members during a crisis which don't align with your values. You had a memory visit from your father during a family illness. Can you expand on this for the audience?
Sure.
And yeah. Yes, I Googled DMSO.
Yeah. Yeah, during the pandemic, my wife Barbara got a call from her sister, who was, she and her husband both proudly unvaccinated, and both contracted COVID very early on. Her husband was put on a ventilator. My wife's sister was also very, very ill at the time. But she got better. Her husband had to be put on a ventilator. And the phone rang, and I was in the next room, and I heard my wife take the call, and I was only hearing one side of the conversation, but it was clear that she was talking to her sister in Tucson. And listening it became clear what had happened, that they had both contracted COVID. She was going to be okay, but her husband had been put on a ventilator. And she was just sobbing to my wife about this. And as a result of that, I had one of the most ungenerous responses I can ever remember. One that I'm not proud to relate even now in the years since. I was so furious. Here this poor woman who was in a terrible situation. Her husband was in a worse situation on a ventilator that he would remain on for a very long time. And calling her sister to say, why us? Why did this have to happen? And it made me so angry that you would ask that question. Who asks that question, given that circumstance? But then my father, as he is wont to do from time to time, you won't be surprised to learn, if those of you who have read some of my fiction, to find that my father has lurched into my consciousness in some way or other. And he did at that moment. Suddenly he was there, and I remembered this time that I went back to visit him. He and I became very close when I was old enough to occupy the bar stool next to his. I didn't see him much when I was a kid. But I worked road construction with him summers when I was back from the university, and we spent a lot of time together, a lot of good time together. But after all of that was over, I remember going back one time to Gloversville, New York, where he was still living, and I learned about what blue-collar bar he and his cronies were drinking at. And when I came into the room, there he was elegance itself on a bar stool. That man, you would, to see him sit on a bar stool, you would think that the building went up around him. But there he was, and he had a wonderful way, if somebody would say, "Hey, Jimmy, is that your kid?" And he would swivel on the bar stool, and he had a certain elegance about the way that he did that. It was very limber, very fluid. He would turn around kind of his body in stages. But this time when he turned around, he was stiff as a board. It was just like he was frozen in wood or stone. And he turned around and said, "Hey, come over here." And he bought me the beer that he remembered I used to drink. And so I said, "What's this?" And he said, I got a stiff neck. A stiff neck. I don't know it doesn't matter. I know a guy. He got me. Said, I'm taking this stuff. It makes my neck feel better. It's only until I can work out the kinks. Well, I asked him about the stuff that he was taking, and it was called DMSO. Anybody here know DMSO? Yeah. Well. And the reason that he was taking it for his stiff neck was that he knew someone at the racetrack and they use DMSO on thoroughbred horses. When something about them needs, it's an industrial solvent, And my father was so pleased because he knew a guy. If he didn't know this guy, he wouldn't have this stuff that he puts it on. And he said, and a couple days later, sure enough, he was moving. He was moving his neck. He said the only problem was that you put it in there. You taste it on the back of your tongue. It has a terrible terrible taste to it. But other than that, it was fine. You know how the story ends, even if you haven't read Stiff Neck. The reason his neck was stiff was that he had lung cancer, and for many months following, he continued to treat his lung cancer with DMSO. And that was the basis, the reason I think that my father lurched into my memory at that moment when I was being particularly ungenerous with someone who was living through a tragedy, was that sense that, my God, don't we all do this? Don't we all want to think that we know a guy? You know, and my father spent his whole life, he was a laborer, did the kind of hard work that just wrecked bodies. His only health care, because he was a veteran, was at the VA, which was an hour away. And people had been telling him his whole life that he didn't know anybody worth knowing. You know, and here he knew a guy. So, and I think to a certain extent that is maybe even responsible for the kind of mob behavior or tribal behavior, as you put it. There are times when we behave the way our tribe behaves because it's the world that we know. We don't know another, and God knows we don't want to. Even when it's very dangerous to do, we want to think we're doing the right thing because we heard it from somebody we trust.
Yep. So triage and meaning, you know, what are the best and worst parts of being a storyteller? And can I see your wedding band? Can you have your wedding band?
I do. The essay triage?
Yeah.
I think that writers write from two motivations. Maybe this is an oversimplification. But I think that there are writers, wonderful writers, who write primarily out of curiosity. And very often they're curious about a ton of different things. And so, and one of the things that I always love about their books, when I find a writer who's really motivated by curiosity, is you pick up the new book by so and so, and you think to yourself, this is just so different from the last book. I loved the last one, I loved this one, but I never would guess it was written by the same person. And I attribute that to the fact that curiosity leads them, as curiosity will, lead you in a lot of different directions. I, on the other hand, am a writer with what I have a bandwidth that's about that wide. I'm not curious. I have to admit, I'm not a terribly curious person. But one of the things that I've learned to do over the decades as a writer is to do what I call triage, which is to put things in categories that will be helpful to me. If I overhear a conversation, or I see something happen, or somebody else tells me a story, or whatever. Most of my own lived experiences, the lived experiences of my friends and family, I recognize immediately is of no value to me. And it goes into this enormous dumpster of stuff that might be just absolutely wonderful for another kind of writer, but is of no use to me, and I'm pretty sure it never will be. And so it's huge. It's this enormous dumpster. On the other hand, if something comes to me and I think, oh, I think I might be able to make use of that, then it goes into the narrow folder It's just like a little manila folder that contains all the stuff that's of use to me, which is why, for instance, one day, in one of my very first academic jobs, was at a branch campus at Penn State University in Altoona, where there was a duck pond. Then it was late August, the semester was about to begin. I was just taking a walk around the pond. There were ducks and geese all over the place. Walking around the pond with Kel Melling, who was the director of faculty. And he was complaining. He was saying, yet again, here we are 2 weeks away from the semester starting. 2 weeks away, yet again, the legislature has not given me my money so that I can hire my adjuncts. The adjuncts these are the most mistreated people in the university. They're not on tenure track positions. They come and they teach. They come and they teach at Penn State Altoona, and they drive down the road and teach at some other place like that. If they live in New York, they probably have 4 different jobs in 4 different universities. All they want to know is whether you're going to continue to abuse them this year, because they really need the money. And that's what Kel was complaining about. I can't hire my adjuncts. Eventually, they're going to give me the money. I think they will, but they haven't so far. What am I going to do? Kill a duck a day? There's a duck walking right past us. What am I going to do? Kill a duck a day until they give me my budget? That went into the slender folder. A decade later, a full decade later, I had William Henry Devereaux Jr. in Straight Man make that same threat. And very often, see, that's the thing about the triage, is that all you know is that it might be valuable to you. You don't know when, you don't know what it's worth now, or you do something with it. But when? 10 years is not really that long to wait for a line like that, in my book anyway. 10 years is not that long to wait for that kind of a line if it results in a novel. I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. So that's my, and the essay begins. It's a very long answer to a very short question, but I will say this too. The reason that essay got written was that I was in New York one day, several years ago now, probably closer to a decade now, when I got a call from my daughter Emily, who was calling to say, you need to come home. Mm-hmm. My grandson was in the hospital with a collapsed lung. He had coughed so hard during the night that he had collapsed his lung, and it wasn't really certain whether he was going to make it or not. And I needed to get on the next possible plane and come home, which of course I did. And there was that terrible moment in the taxi from New York heading to the airport where I was negotiating with whoever had the power to make this different, and saying things like that when you say it at times like this, take me, not him. Those kinds of things. Any negotiator who could make that happen, I'm happy to talk to at that particular moment. Because and it was an earnest effort. But I will say this: at the time, I also thought to myself, what I'm feeling right now, this abject terror, this need to change what can't be changed, that went into the slender folder too. That's in the triage. And the sad fact of the matter is, writers use people. It's all we have. And I say that because sometimes it seems like what we do is some kind of superior, it's some sort of superior moral engagement that we have. And it can be, but it's all based on something pretty simple. And if you're like me, just a little bit frightening too, that writers use people.
Yep. So Marriage Story, can you describe your childhood in Gloversville and what America meant to your parents and why? It was a nice essay.
This is a long essay,
yeah,
and I don't want to make it that long. I don't want to make it that long an answer. My father came home from the Second World War, a bona fide war hero. Was part of the Normandy invasion, fought all the way to Berlin, and came home, as I say, just a bona fide war hero. And for several years, he and my mother partied for a while, as you would after an experience like that. But before long, it became clear that they were not on the same page at all. My mother believed that as a result of the war, that doors were going to open to people like her, to people like my father. The doors to the country clubs were all going to be thrown open. They would be welcome everywhere. They won the big fight. And America, how could America not change? And so, she wanted to start her home. She wanted to buy a house. She felt that education was the answer, and that thanks to things like the GI Bill, government-backed low-interest student loans that I took out at her insistence, that the world was going to change for people like her, but even more so for people like me if I took advantage of the things that were being offered, which I did at her insistence. My father was very different. He didn't have any particular belief in education, but more than that, he didn't believe that America was going to change at all. He thought it was going to be pretty much what it was. What it was before was what it was going to be afterwards. He believed that the deck was stacked against him and other people like him. As I said earlier, he worked hard for his life, all his life, doing hard physical labor. He knew that wasn't respected in America and probably never would be. Every time I got optimistic with him about something good that had happened, I went out and got the PhD that my mother wanted me to get. But every time I said something optimistic to him, he'd look at me and say, "You do remember that your name ends in a vowel, right?" And he believed, I think, until his dying day, and I don't think he's all that wrong, that the cops sit outside the bars where working men drink, and not outside the spiffier uptown places where the doctors and the lawyers drink. And I think he believed his entire life that he was playing against a stacked deck. And as I look back at it, the thing that's wonderful about it is that neither my mother nor my father was right. And I owe them both more than I can say, because it was America that they were arguing about, and it was America that I wanted to write about. And when you find two people that you love that much who disagree about everything, about the most basic things about human experience, that is a gift that lasts. Let me tell you from experience, that gift lasts a lifetime. I'm still going at it, as some of you know.
So I'm going to switch to the section called art.
Okay.
And I found this fascinating, the section Future, how Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and how you related that to the world today and your parents. That was amazing essay. That was very interesting essay.
This is in some ways this essay called The Future. Is, I don't know if it's my favorite essay in the book, but it's by far the one that I had the most fun writing. And again, pandemic thing, Barbara, my wife, was she would scroll through during the pandemic. I mean, we all look for things to cheer us up, right? Something that was a bad time, and I remember Barbara would watch old episodes of MASH and old episodes of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the Bob Newhart Show, all those things that we watched with such relish when we were young. And I know that Barbara found them just, very comforting in that time when we were all looking for comfort wherever we could find it. And one day I wasn't looking in the same places that she was looking at, but I was looking at things that from my childhood, from my younger manhood. I think I watched The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad a half a dozen times during that period. But I also ran across Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and I watched it, and I was about 30 minutes into it when I suddenly realized for the first time what that movie was about. It's about change, right? It's about, more than anything else, it's about disruption. What happens when things change? What happens when everything changes? Remember that movie begins with Paul Newman going into the bank and looking at the new vault, right? The armed guards inside, the bars on the doors, and he goes back and tells Sundance, this is different now. We can't rob banks like this. And his conclusion is we're going to have to be more careful, right? That's understating it by a lot. if in the middle of a disruption, you think, all right, this is going to take a lot more care now. You're really underestimating the situation that you're in. Because really what was going on in that movie and what was going on in their lives was that the horse is being replaced by the wheel. Remember the famous raindrops keep falling on my head sequence where Butch comes back to Etta's place, and there's a huckster the night before who is hawking bicycles up on the stage, and he calls the bicycle the future. And Butch apparently buys one because he appears the next day with the bicycle, and that's when the raindrops keep falling on my head song is going on. And at the end of it, they wreck the bicycle. They very nearly get seriously injured, and Butch takes the bicycle, throws it away, and says, "So long, future." And shortly after that, of course, they take off for Bolivia. Also, not another great move. But after Bolivia, just as they're finally about to burst from that hiding place that they're in, and of course we know that they're going to get gunned down. We've seen all the federales lining up along the rooftops. We know exactly what's going to happen. They don't know that. We know exactly what's going to happen. And Butch is already trying to convince Sundance that where they really need to go is to Australia. Why? Well, for one thing, they speak English in Australia, right? Which is not true where they've been. But the real reason that it will be better to go to Australia, they've got horses. So anyway, that was one of my favorite essays because it was just such a nutty thing to do, to look at disruption. And my God, we're still in the middle of it, and it's good. And now we've got AI coming down the road at us. AI, we're beginning to learn that artificial intelligence, the first jobs that are going to be sacrificed to artificial intelligence is going to be coders. What are all the people who write code? The world is going to change dramatically. It's going to change dramatically for all of us. but what do you do in a disruption? And the Butch Cassidy movie makes clear, and serious studies of disruption makes clear, that the only way out is through. Be careful. Be very suspicious of people who try to sell you the future, but be even more careful of people trying to sell you the past.
It was very, very clever. It was a great essay. I watched The Office during COVID, the pandemic. We watched. So we have to talk about Paul Newman. So that's next in the book. Can you share your relationship, how your relationship developed during the filming of Nobody's Fool?
My relationship with
Newman.
Paul?
Yeah.
Well, we did a number of projects together. We did Nobody's Fool. And then after that, we did Empire Falls, and we did a movie called Twilight. And we were always looking for something to do together. Him and Robert Benton, my dear friend who just passed recently. I think the first thing that changed in terms of my relationship with Paul was that when I saw the movie, I realized that Ben and I were trying to write this scene. It's the scene where Sully is seated in the truck with his son, trying to explain why he was such a bad father. And in the novel, there's just a lot of dialogue there. And Paul kept saying, "Now there's just too much dialogue. And Benton and I would cut it. We'd cut the dialogue. And finally, he said, "You know what? Let's just do this. Let's just do this cut." And all that explanation, all that dialogue, all of Sully's trying to explain to Peter, and it goes on in the novel. He's got a lot of reasons for why things went south so early in the marriage, and why he was such a shitty father. In the novel, in the movie, you're watching it through wipers. And I think there's maybe one or two lines of dialogue. I think he says, my father, he's talking about his own father, he could make my mother fly. And that's the only dialogue in it. Otherwise, it's just his haunted face as he's remembering this. And that's the first time my relationship changed with Paul, because I realized what a great actor can bring. That wasn't my Sully. That was his Sully. And it was every bit as valid or more valid than the Sully that I had written in the novel. So my admiration for actors in general, and great actors in particular, went up. But it only continued to keep going that way, because when I wrote the next Fool novel, and Sully was part of that, I realized that the character that I had always considered mine wasn't really mine anymore, or at least it wasn't wholly mine, because his portrayal, Paul's portrayal of Sully, had gotten so under my skin. I believed in him every bit as thoroughly as I believed in the character that I myself had put on the page. That character now was shared. It was co-owned between me and Paul Newman. And that's not the only time that's happened too. The same thing happened with Philip Seymour Hoffman, who had a very small role in Nobody's Fool. He plays a very young, scared Officer Raymer. And of course, Officer Raymer is a major character in the second Fool novel. And I channeled Philip Seymour Hoffman throughout that novel. I just pretended every time Officer Raymer, then Chief of Police Raymer, every time he had a line of dialogue, I swear to God, it was Philip Seymour Hoffman speaking through my pen. And that's the relationship. Paul and I worked on Empire Falls together, and my God, I mean the performances in that miniseries were stunning. All of the actors in that were stunning, and yet somehow he managed to steal every scene that and for many of the same reasons as in the other things that we had worked on earlier.
So what is next for Richard Russo?
Well, I have a new novel coming out next year. And I don't want to say all that much about that. Well, I will say one thing about it because it's just so strange. 2 or 3 other writers and I, this was during the strike, the writer's strike, and everything shut down, including all the things that we were all working on. Everything was suddenly on a morphine drip. We didn't have anything to do. I mean, we were all novelists, so we were writing our novels. But we thought, well, maybe let's work on something together. Maybe a miniseries, a thriller. Everybody's hot for thrillers. Maybe we'll write a thriller miniseries. And so I wrote the first episode and got notes from it. From these other 2 writers, and we thought, well, when the time comes, we'll send out this pilot, and then we'll divide. If it's 8 episodes, we'll divide up the other episodes, and we'll do this together. We'll be the writers in the writing room. Except that when the writer's strike finished up, nothing changed in Hollywood. Nothing was still getting made. In fact, if anything, Hollywood is more screwed up today than it's ever been, and all kinds of projects are sitting around. And when it became clear to me that everything was dead in the water, including this pilot, I thought to myself, you know what? I bet I know how to do that as a novel. So that's what I did. I asked permission from my fellow writers who had given their time to give me notes, and I wrote the thing as a novel. I have no idea whether anybody will be interested in making a movie of it. But we've already got the first episode, or a TV series. We've already got the first episode written, and I've got 3 other screenwriters going along with it, so we'll see. But in the meantime, next year, a novel of mine will come out called Under the Falls. It's my first thriller, but I'd like to think at least that it's you're going to recognize who wrote it.
It's exciting. Well, thank you for answering my questions.
Again, thank you for doing this. It's so kind of you.
Thank you both. This is now the chance for anyone in the audience to ask a question of Mr. Russo. We do ask that you come here to this microphone so that everyone can hear you, and you are being recorded, so we need to hear you.
Hello. Hello, Professor Russo. It's been a long time since I've had the chance to call you that.
Good Lord. Where? Okay, now you got to tell me.
Yes, it's Mike Rusko. I was in your writing workshop
Mike,
at Southern.
how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, thanks. You're obviously doing well, too. I want to thank you for your acknowledgement of the plight of adjunct instructors.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember us standing in the hallway in Southern and you telling me that going into teaching was an emotional black hole. But I know...
Sounds like me.
But I have to tell you, you were absolutely one of the finest teachers I ever had.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask you if spending all that time with young writers, sometimes very ambitious young writers, talking about the principles of writing and storytelling, 3, 4, 5 times a week, how many hours a week you did it. What if anything, did that do for you as your development as a writer?
I think that, thank you for the question. Well, I mean, I have academic grandchildren out there now. It's I think one of the benefits for teaching from teaching for me is that when you have, and it doesn't really even matter whether you're talking about an introduction to fiction writing class for undergraduates or a second-year MFA fiction writing class at a university. I don't think it really matters all that much where on the scale, because obviously if you're in an MFA program, you've done an awful lot more writing and you know an awful lot. You've developed your skills, you've honed your skills much more at that level than you would at an introduction to fiction writing class as a sophomore undergraduate. But the thing that is good for the writer in teaching ambitious writers at any level is that when you keep going over the fundamentals, when you keep going over the basics of how to create well-rounded characters, how to know when you've got a conflict that will really work, on what basis you would decide to tell the story first person or omniscient or close third person. And what do we mean when we talk about tone? Those are the big four. Tone is the author's attitude towards his subject matter. How does he feel about it? When you go over again and again and again those basic fundamentals, what happens is that it's harder for you to shit yourself when you go back to your own writing desk the next morning. Because no matter how much you know, no matter how much you understand, the more likely you are to finesse yourself, to not realize that you're not 100% sure what you feel about this character, about a particular character, or about the story that you're telling. What is your motivation for it? So I think that's the best thing about teaching, is that the more you do it, the more convinced you are that your skills will see you through. But ultimately, most good books don't come down to skill. They don't come down to talent, really. They come down to knowing who you are and what you love, and those are hard lessons to learn, but you get sent back to them time and time and time again through teaching.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope I get a chance to say hi later.
Anyone else? Oh, come on.
Hello, and thank you so much for your wonderful novels. I've enjoyed them all.
Thank you.
I'm just curious to know how you approach writing literally. Like, are you an 8 to 4 type of writer? I stay up I get an idea, I work 24/7 until it's out on paper. What's your process?
Well, I'm going to give you the facts of the case, and let you decide which interpretation you want to place on them. I generally consider a good day anywhere between 2 and 3 pages, and if I can get that, that's a good day, and I consider that I've had a very good writing day. If you write, and my first fiction writing teacher told me this. If you write 2 or 3 pages a day, and you do it 7 days a week, which I don't want to skip on the weekends, just makes it that much harder to go back on Monday. So I write every day. Generally, when I was a beginner, I was probably writing a couple hours a day. Now I can get in maybe 2.5, generally in the morning. So 2.5 hours, maybe 2 hours a day, something like that. 2 pages. If you do that, at the end of a year, you will have something the size of a book. It won't be a book, but it will be the size of a book. You will go back and revise that any number of times, or at least portions of it. The beginning, the first third of the book will usually be revised much more than the second third, and the second third will be revised much more than the final third, because the final third, you're on the home stretch then, and there aren't that many choices to make anymore. You're just dashing for the finish line. But so based on what I've said, then a couple of hours in the morning, getting maybe 2 or 3 pages. For me, that's writing in longhand because I still like pen, paper, and all of that. Take a break, have some lunch, and then put it on the computer in the afternoon. What does that take? Maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2. I don't know, because you can't help but revise. You're not going to type just what you wrote in longhand. You're going to think, oh no, that's no good, and you'll think of something better, or make a note. Something better here. And so then by the end of the day, what have I put in? I've put in 2 hours in the morning, maybe 2.5 on a good day. I've gotten 2 or 3 pages, put that on disk in the afternoon, and that's my day. Except, usually between the morning and the afternoon, I will go for a 3-mile walk. And I do that, as I tell myself, to clear my mind. I've been working. I've been living in my head. I read the paper in the morning. I worked. So now I'll clear my head from all this writing stuff, and I'll go back and walk. I'll go out and walk. The funny thing is, though, when you tell yourself that you're going to clear your head, I will almost always come back with an idea or two that I will make a note for. So that hour when I walk, am I writing then? Would you count that as writing? I don't know. But even when I swear I'm not going to, I know that I come back with ideas that I'm going to make notes about. So still, I'm through by late afternoon, by which time, by mid-afternoon, the rest of my day is reading. So and it's been more and more, ever since the pandemic, it's just been more and more and more. I average about 2 books a week now, reading. But the thing about reading is, I mean, writers read with larceny in their hearts. They're not going to steal a line of dialogue or a paragraph or a page or anything like that. But what they are going to do is say, what did I learn from this? This was a great passage. What made that so great? What could I make use of later? Because if I haven't come across this exact problem or circumstance, if I haven't come across that yet, there's a pretty good chance I will. And so you log that in the back of your mind, and you say, all right, or you make a note of it in your notebook. If you keep a notebook, keep a note of a book. If here's something that gets done exquisitely well from omniscient point of view that doesn't work very well in close third-person point of view, or here's something that works really well in effaced. You make a note of the story that you read that was in effaced point of view. To come back to it later if you get in a situation like that. Is that writing? Is your reading writing? So as I say, that's more or less my day. But depending on how you look at it, I only write for like 3.5 hours a day on a good day. But if you look at it the other way, I'm never not writing. So I leave it to you to decide. The second way is much more flattering.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question? Sorry, I just wanted to ask one. Do you have a current favorite author that you like to read?
Oh gosh, just down in the green room before we were coming up here, we're talking with some people about the great Maggie O'Farrell, whom I stop whatever I'm doing when Maggie O'Farrell has a new book out. So she is somebody who certainly comes immediately to mind. The book that I brought with me on this, I'm out 4 days this week in various places. This leg of the book tour is Jess Walter's new book. Jess, I don't know how many of you know his work, Beautiful Ruins, and I mean all of his work, every single book. You just have to read. He is pound for pound the funniest writer in America, I think, and I'm completely drawn, of course, to humor. So I'm reading Jess right now. But if we spoke next week, I'd probably have two other authors for you.
All right, thank you.
Hi.
You set me up for this question. How do you know when you have a conflict that works?
A good conflict is one that you yourself have no idea how to resolve. For instance, in Nobody's Fool, the book begins with, after Sully, the protagonist has fallen off a ladder and shattered his knee. And like my father, his entire working life has been doing hard physical labor that you need your body to be, despite the fact that your body gets beaten up, you still need your body to do this work, and you need it to be functioning, and you can't do it on one leg. So Sully has fallen off a ladder, he has shattered his leg, and he can't work anymore. Or at least he can't work like he used to. And so he's gone back to school at the local community college looking for some sort of job that he could do if he possessed a couple of different skills, maybe in something like air refrigeration or something like that. Just something he needs a new skill and something that he can do basically on one leg, or at least not be putting pressure on that busted knee all the time. The problem is that all the other students in this community college class that he's taking, they're all 19 years old. And he just can't do it. He can't be in there with a bunch of 19-year-olds studying air conditioning. It's just impossible for him. So he can't work, and he can't not work. What do? That's a conflict. It's a conflict because I don't know what Sully should do. I have no idea, and I think he's gonna show me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can we have another round of applause? You all are very quiet. I'd like to thank Mr. Russo and Susie Leopold for coming today. And thank you all in the audience for coming. Just so you know, our summer reading challenge is open to everybody. And one of the challenges happens to be read a book by an author who visits the Westport Library during 2025. And you all have the book. So pick up a bookmark on your way out, and we'll see you at the Summer Reading Challenge. And thank you all so much for coming. If you have asked for a personalization for this book, you're going to line up right here, and Mr. Russo will countersign your book. And if you want to purchase another book, you'll come here and purchase the second book. And thank you all so much for coming out tonight.